chapter 2 is very interesting chapter. Why? Because chapter 3 is saying, okay, we are talking about building resilience and climate resilience for Africa. We are talking about energy transition for Africa. But for that, we need resources. One of the main findings that chapter is that up to 1.6 trillion US dollars is needed for Africa climate commitment and its nationally determined contribution. Put annually, this amount represents 145.5 billion US dollar. But what is Africa receiving? Africa is receiving only 18.3 billion a year if we consider the annual average of climate finance inflows over the past 4 years prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So that leaves a climate financing gap of 127.2 billion a year, which needs to be filled. Do we have resources for that? Yes. Why? Because if you see what happened just over the less than 3 years during the COVID-19 pandemic, between January 2020 and September 2021, 17 trillion US dollars have been injected in the world economy to respond to the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. And out of that amount of money, 15.3 trillion, or about 90%, have been mobilized by the G20 developed countries, which have committed to mobilize 100 billion US dollar of climate finance for developing countries. So resources for climate finance is not an issue. The issue is political will. And that is one of the key findings of the report. If countries have been able to mobilize so much money just for COVID-19 pandemic, why can't they do the same for climate change, which is a global phenomenon, which is a global threat to the world? So what we are saying in that chapter 3 that we need to find not only new financing instruments. We have carbon market, we have green finance, and in green finance we have green bonds, we have green loans, we have sustainable bonds, we have sustainability-linked bonds and loans. So we have those kinds of innovative financing instruments that can be used and leveraged in order to fund additional resources for climate finance. But also African countries have a role to play. They need to make bold reforms, not only in terms of governance reforms, not only in terms of financial instrument reform, not only in terms of mobilizing financial resources internally. They need to attract the private sector. And for that, they need to put in place a good instrument. And one of them is to leverage blended finance, which can help de-risk the private sector participation in global finance. So the next COP27, which will be held in Egypt, is a huge opportunity for Africa because there they need to leverage, they need to advocate for more climate finance and try to negotiate so that the continent receive the climate finance that it needs to receive, given its low contribution to the global carbon emissions, but also to the needs, given that the continent is the one that is the most affected by climate change and climate shocks.